Campaign finance reform necessity. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. People working on jobs with low wages, they need more. Corporations refuse to pay it. They cutting wages to get more profit, hitting poor and middle class in the pocket. The system built by and for capitalists, using poor and middle class to pay for it. Poor and middle class support corporations on both sides of the economic equation. Poor and middle class provide the labor for goods and services, working for low pay. At the same time, the poor and middle class buy these goods and services with their cash. Corporations need to be humble. Without poor and middle class, they would crumble. Homeless families on the street, no food to eat. Their babies crying from hunger, where's relief? Jesus Christ said about the least of these, what you do to them, you do to him. Corrupt capitalists, this is their mission. Capitalism, the capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. Capitalistic system. BGMGproductions.com. B Goines and M Goines. Welcome to Political Facts with Byron Goines
and Michelle Goines.
The song you heard is entitled Capitalistic System and is available to purchase at bgmgproductions.com. We're on a mission to educate and inform our listeners on everything concerning politics that they will not hear through any other media. This is broadcast number 2 of 2 consecutive broadcasts dedicated to explaining the truth about capitalism. This lecture is available in its entirety for purchase at bgmgproductions.com. Let's get into part 2 of the lecture. Now, Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines capitalist as, definition number 1, a person who has capital, especially invested in business. And this definition gives an example of this in the form of industrial capitalists. This definition is also defined broadly as a person of wealth, plutocrat. Definition number 2 is a person who favors capitalism. A plutocrat is defined as a person of wealth, and Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines plutocracy as, definition number 1, government by the wealthy. Definition number 2, a controlling class of the wealthy. And this is what exists in the United States of America. The United States is a plutocracy and an oligarchy, and they have attempted to obfuscate it and call it a democracy. So the people of the United States don't see it. But people are waking up in what I call the 21st century Enlightenment period. The people see the government corruption that exists, and they are ready for positive change. The government of the United States is supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, as stated by President Abraham Lincoln. But this is not the case. The government of the United States is a government of, by, and for the wealthy. And it is a controlling class of the wealthy, as stated in the definition of plutocracy. The government of the United States is also an oligarchy, as you'll see shortly when we look at its definition. Big money special interests are controlling the political process and politics in general in the United States. Politicians exist who are bought and paid for by big money special interests. As a result, they vote yes on legislation in favor of big money special interests, over the will of poor and middle-class people in the United States. Corporate lobbyists lobby Congress successfully to get legislation passed that will benefit them, to the detriment of poor and middle-class people in the United States. Politicians pass tax cuts for the rich. As a result, campaign finance reform and lobby reform are a necessity. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines oligarch as a person who belongs to a small group of people who govern or control a country, business, etc. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines oligarchy as definition number 1, government by the few. Definition number 2, a government in which a small group exercises control, especially for corrupt and selfish purposes. And the definition goes on to state also a group exercising such control. Definition number 3, an organization under oligarchic control. This is also what exists in the United States of America. It is a government where the few control the many, and a small group exercises control for corrupt and selfish purposes. The government of the United States is an oligarchy, as a small group of the wealthy control the masses of poor and middle-class people through the utilization of big money, with which they buy politicians who have been elected by poor and middle-class people who make up the majority of the voting bloc, but the politicians work against the best interests of the poor and middle-class people who elected them in favor of the interests of the wealthy who financially support those politicians, in return for those politicians voting in favor of legislation that will benefit the wealthy. This is what is known as one hand washing the other politics, where big money is controlling the body politic through the means of obfuscation, making people think the United States is a democracy, when in fact it is a plutocracy and an oligarchy. Democratic principles cannot be realized in a government where big money is controlling the political process behind the scenes through corporate lobbyists and corporate donations to super PACs to help political candidates win elections, while the capitalists have poor and middle-class people on a treadmill working and going about their daily activities in the capitalist efforts to keep poor and middle-class people so preoccupied with their daily lives that they don't see what's really going on in the government. Now let's deal with some more truth about capitalism. Two fundamental facts are present in the economic system of capitalism: the exploitation and oppression of people. And it does not matter whether it's laissez-faire capitalism, which is also free market capitalism, or whether it's regulated capitalism. Exploitation and oppression exists, and this is a fact. Now, Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines exploit as definition number 1, to make productive use of. Definition number 2, to make use of meanly or unfairly for one's own advantage. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines oppress as definition 1A, to crush or burden by abuse of power or authority. Now, these are the two definitions of two words that are present in the economic system of capitalism: the exploitation and oppression of people. And because of the fact that workers are exploited and oppressed by their employers, unions are a necessity, and the workers' right to organize is a necessity. The workers are used for the advantage of the capitalists, and the workers are crushed or burdened by the capitalists' abuse of power and authority, as the workers provide the labor to produce the goods and provide the services, with multitudes of people working for low wages at non-union corporations, where they are not able to bargain with management for higher wages. And those same non-union corporations have their workers fearful of losing their jobs if they even speak about forming a union. As a result, the workers are used for the advantage of those corporations, and they are crushed or burdened by those corporations' abuse of power and authority. And remember, those corporations are owned and operated by capitalists. So remember, when you hear the word corporations, this also includes the word capitalists. Now, as a result of the economic system of capitalism, which includes United States regulated capitalism, poverty has not ended in the United States, and poverty will not end in the United States through capitalism because of the fact that capitalism, including United States regulated capitalism, enables capitalists to run roughshod over the poor and middle class, which they have done successfully in the United States for generations. Capitalism, including United States regulated capitalism, has not ended poverty in the United States, and capitalism has existed in the United States since its beginning. Now, what capitalism has done in the United States is increase the gap between the rich and poor through the exploitation and oppression of the workers for the benefit of the capitalists. Along with the passing of legislation lobbied for by corporate lobbyists, which helps the capitalists in their efforts to exploit and oppress the workers. This is the reason campaign finance reform and lobby reform must become a reality in the United States. As I stated earlier, capitalism is about the exploitation and oppression of people, as history proves. Capitalists benefited exponentially from the transatlantic slave trade, as enslaved Africans were forced to provide their labor for the benefit of capitalists. In the United States and the South, one of the major crops was cotton, and that cotton was picked by slaves. The Southern economy was built on cotton, as it came to be called King Cotton. The Southern plantations flourished as a direct result of the economic system of capitalism that generated massive amounts of wealth for the plantation owners off of the backs of slaves. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines imperialism as definition number 1, the policy, practice, or advocacy of extending the power and dominion of a nation, especially by direct territorial acquisitions or by gaining indirect control over the political or economic life of other areas. Broadly, the extension or imposition of power, authority, or influence. Union imperialism. Definition number 2, imperial government, authority, or system. Collins' online dictionary defines imperialism as a system in which a rich and powerful country controls other countries, or a desire for control over other countries. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary, in definition 3A, defines colonialism as controlled by one power over a dependent area or people. Collins' online dictionary defines colonialism as the practice by which a powerful country directly controls less powerful countries and uses their resources to increase its own power and wealth. Now, both online dictionaries correctly define imperialism and colonialism. Both imperialism and colonialism are directly connected to capitalism throughout the history of the world, as capitalism is a system that exploits and oppresses people. European imperialism and colonialism through capitalism and for capitalism resulted in the colonizing of areas and the stealing of their precious resources. Whether you're talking about North America, Africa, India, or Australia, and the list goes on, indigenous peoples throughout the world were victims of imperialism and colonialism through capitalism and for capitalism. And one doesn't have to look far to find the victims. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain funded the voyage of Christopher Columbus in his quest for the gold and spices of the East Indies. Although Columbus did not land in the East Indies, Columbus landed on an island in the Caribbean, and the Spaniards stole gold and enslaved indigenous people of the area. And large numbers of indigenous people died through murder and disease. And in what is now known as the United States, the indigenous people experienced horrific acts of violence perpetrated against them. And as I stated earlier, capitalists benefited exponentially from the transatlantic slave trade, as enslaved Africans were forced to provide their labor for the benefit of capitalists, and large numbers of Africans died as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, concerning the foothold capitalism gained in the land now known as the United States, the Virginia Company of London, through shareholders, funded the establishment of the first permanent colony in Jamestown, Virginia. In 1618, the Virginia Company established a head right system in order to increase immigration to North America. Their goal was to get as many Europeans as possible to immigrate to the so-called New World, which was already inhabited by millions of Native Americans back when the first European expeditions to the so-called New World began. The Library of Virginia at www.lva.virginia.gov, in a section addressing the head right system, states the following. In order to encourage immigration into the colony, the Virginia Company, meeting in a quarter court held on 18 November 1618, passed a body of laws called Orders and Constitutions, which came to be considered the Great Charter of Privileges, Orders, and Laws of the colony. Among these laws was a provision that any person who settled in Virginia or paid for the transportation expenses of another person who settled in Virginia should be entitled to receive 50 acres of land for each immigrant. The right to receive 50 acres per person or per head was called the head right. Now, European immigration began, and European immigration increase was sought through the head right system. And although the land was already inhabited by millions of Native Americans when the Europeans arrived, imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism were the driving factors, and have always been the driving factors. Some nation relationships started as trading relationships that developed into one nation conquering the other, and then the conquering nation exploits and oppresses the people of the nation they conquered. And they do this for one reason: capitalism. If there was nothing of substantive value to be gained through nations stealing from others and exploiting and oppressing the people they stole from, then there would be no historical records of imperialism and colonialism. And as is clearly shown, there are vast records of imperialism and colonialism which are directly connected to capitalism. Now, let's take a look in the Bible concerning capitalism. Some historians and economists state that the beginning of the economic system called capitalism traces back to the end of a political and economic system in medieval Europe based on hierarchy called feudalism. In reality, capitalism can be traced all of the way back to the Bible. And although the word capitalism did not exist, the economic system of capitalism can be seen clearly. Socialism can also be traced all of the way back to the Bible. And although the word socialism did not exist, the economic system of socialism can be seen clearly. For information about socialism, our lecture, The Truth About Socialism, will enlighten you on this and other truth concerning socialism that people have attempted to deceive Americans about. First, let's cover some verses in the Old Testament concerning capitalism in the King James Version of the Bible. Remember, capitalism is a system of exploitation and oppression. And today, in the 21st century, employers are still exploiting and oppressing the workers. Under the law that was given by God to Moses for the Israelites, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 13 reads as follows: "Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning." In other words, the employer is not to cheat the worker and rob the worker of wages. The employer is not to hold on to the worker's wages until the next morning. The worker is to be paid by the employer. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 14 reads as follows: "Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates." In other words, the employer is not to oppress an employee who is poor and needy, whether the employee is a fellow Israelite or a stranger in the land. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 15 reads as follows: "At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee." In other words, the employer is to pay the employee on the same day before the sun sets, because the employee is poor and in need of the money. The consequence of the employer not doing this will result in the employer committing a sin. Jeremiah chapter 22, verse 13 reads as follows: "Woe unto him that buildeth his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers by wrong, that useth his neighbor's service without wages, and giveth him not for his work." In other words, woe to the employer who receives labor from the employee and refuses to pay the employee. Malachi chapter 3, verse 5 reads as follows: "And I will come near to you to judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, and against the adulterers, and against false swearers, and against those that oppress the hireling in his wages, the widow, and the fatherless, and that turn aside the stranger from his right, and fear not me, saith the Lord of hosts." In this verse concerning employers, in the part of the verse that states, "and against those that oppress the hireling in his wages," God is saying that he will draw near in judgment and be a swift witness against employers who oppress their employees in wages. In other words, employers who oppress employees in wages will have to answer to God for their actions. Now, these verses that I just read were law for the Israelites. The law was given by God to Moses for the Israelites, and the Israelites were to follow the law. God specifically laid out the way in which employers were to treat employees, and the consequences for employers who refused to follow the law and oppressed their employees. These verses are straightforward, and employers were under God's command concerning how they were to treat their employees. God did not allow oppression of employees. Now, just as capitalism in the 21st century is a system of exploitation and oppression where employers exploit and oppress workers, capitalism in the Old Testament was a system of exploitation and oppression and was addressed by God in his law that was given to the Israelites through Moses. And under God's law, corrupt employers were specifically addressed. In the Old Testament, commerce and trade existed. People engaged in business and would buy and sell goods. People hired workers for their labor. Employer and employee relationships existed. Capitalism clearly existed, although the word capitalism did not exist. Now let's look at some information concerning capitalism in the New Testament during the time of Jesus Christ. Matthew chapter 21, verses 12 and 13 reads as follows. And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. In these verses, capitalism is clearly evident in the temple of God, as there were money changers and buying and selling going on in the temple. And none of this should have been going on in the temple. As a result, this corruption was addressed by Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul defined corrupt capitalists throughout the generations of time, and the words of the Apostle Paul still hold true today in the 21st century. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, the Apostle Paul stated the following to his protege, Timothy. Verses 9 and 10 of 1 Timothy chapter 6 reads as follows. Verse 9, But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Verse 10, For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Both verses address the mind of a corrupt capitalist. Let's look at verse 9. It's clear that corrupt capitalists will do anything to get as much profit as possible, as the temptation of potential unlimited amounts of money and profit is what drives corrupt capitalists. The historical list is long of corrupt capitalists in prison for corruption as a result of the temptation of unlimited amounts of money and profit to be gained through illegal activities. In verse 10, the Apostle Paul stated that the love of money is the root of all evil. He did not say some evil. The Apostle Paul stated all evil. And this is clear concerning capitalists and capitalism. Remember what I stated earlier. The definition of capitalism is referring to a phrase utilized by capitalists around the world, and the phrase is laissez faire capitalism, or in other words, free market capitalism, which are both referring to an economic system consisting of private or corporate operation with no government interference, which would enable a corporation to monopolize an industry and run roughshod over their employees in order to get as much profit as possible. Also, remember that in the economic system of capitalism, workers are exploited by employers and workers are oppressed in their wages, and this is done by the employers for profit. Today, in the 21st century, there are corporations that hire employees and pay them low wages in order to get more profit. And these same corporations that pay low wages to their employees sell their goods and services at higher prices to get more profit. As a result, these corporations squeeze more profit on both sides of the economic equation. They extract profit from the low wages they pay their employees, and they extract profit from the higher prices they charge for their goods and services. For these corporations, it's about getting as much profit as possible through all means available. James chapter 5, verses 1 through 4 reads as follows. Verse 1, Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Verse 2, Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Verse 3, Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat of your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Verse 4, Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. In the first 3 verses, it is clearly evident that the capitalists were rich and people of wealth, as stated in the definition of the word capitalist. In verse 4, it is clearly evident that the capitalist has capital especially invested in business, as stated in the definition of the word capitalist. The capitalists have undoubtedly invested in land and has hired workers to work the land and have not paid the workers. So that James chapter 5 verse 4 is clearly understandable, let's read this verse using the New International Version. James chapter 5 verse 4 reads as follows. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. In James chapter 4, verses 1 through 4, as a result of the corruption of these capitalists, they chose not to pay their workers. And as I have proven, corruption is nothing new concerning capitalists and the system of capitalism. As I close today's lecture, capitalism is an economic system where the rich exploit and oppress the poor and middle class. If the poor and middle class did not exist, the rich would not exist, as the rich become rich through the poor and middle class. The rich obtain poor and middle class labor to produce the goods and provide the services. And the rich sell the majority of those goods and services produced by poor and middle class labor to the same poor and middle class who provide the labor to produce the goods and provide the services. As a result, the poor and middle class are supporting the rich on both sides of the economic equation. And at the same time, the wealth gap between the rich and poor is increasing as a result of capitalism. Capitalism will not end poverty. As a result, it is time to change the system to one that will end poverty. Universal basic income at $2,000 per month for every United States citizen at least 18 years of age. Universal health care consisting of free health care in all areas of health care. Free public education from pre-K through graduate degrees. A $22 per hour federal minimum wage. Increasing regulations on capitalism to make the system fair and protect the environment, and campaign finance reform and lobby reform to stop the buying of politicians by corporations will go a long way towards ending poverty in the United States and will result in a more just and equitable system. We thank you for your time. You can purchase this lecture in its entirety at bgmgproductions.com.
This completes our lecture. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll pick it up next time with a new topic
on Political Facts with Byron Goines
and Michelle Goines.
Capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. Corrupt capitalists, they ain't changed. Capitalism still be running things. The ignorant fell hard for the trap. Capitalism extended the wealth gap. Rich get richer, poor and middle class struggle. A system known as the capitalism hustle. Laissez faire capitalism. Exploitation, oppression, mission. The system known as capitalism is directly tied to imperialism. change the way it should be. Campaign finance reform necessity. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. BGMG, we on a mission to do something about this capitalistic system. People working on jobs with low wages, they need more. Corporations refuse to pay it. They cutting wages to get more profit, hitting poor and middle class in the pocket. The system built by and for capitalists, using poor and middle class to pay for it. Poor and middle class support corporations on both sides of the economic equation. Poor and middle class provide the labor for goods and services, working for low pay. At the same time, the poor and middle class buy these goods and services with their cash. Corporations need to be humble. Without poor and middle class, they would crumble. Homeless families on the street, no food to eat. Their babies crying from hunger, where's relief? Jesus Christ said about